Have you noticed how much energy you waste being bothered by other people? Someone cuts you off in traffic and your entire morning is ruined. A colleague makes a thoughtless comment and you're replaying it for hours. Your partner forgets something small and suddenly you're vibrating with irritation. We spend so much of our lives being angry, offended, disturbed by the actions of others. And the exhausting thing is that none of it changes anything. The person who bothered you has already moved on with their day, while you're still carrying the weight of your reaction. Alan Watts understood something profound about anger and being bothered. It wasn't about suppressing your feelings or becoming a passive doormat. It was about seeing through the mechanism that creates disturbance in the first place. Because once you see it clearly, the whole game falls apart. And what remains is a kind of freedom that most people never discover. You have to understand something first. Anger doesn't come from other people. It never has. This might sound strange because it certainly feels like anger comes from outside. That person said something offensive. That driver was reckless. That situation was unfair. The cause seems obvious. But here's what Alan Watts would point out. Between the external event and your anger, there's a story, a narrative, an interpretation. And that story is where the anger actually lives. Someone cuts you off in traffic. That's just a car changing lanes, a physical event. But immediately your mind adds a story. That person is disrespecting me. They think they're more important than I am. How dare they? And it's that story, not the lane change itself, that creates the anger. The event is neutral. Your story about the event is what disturbs you. Think about that. Two people experience the exact same situation. One person gets furious, the other barely notices. Same event, completely different reactions. Why? Because they're telling themselves different stories about what happened. The person who gets angry is running a story about disrespect, about fairness, about how things should be. The person who doesn't get angry either isn't running that story, or they see it for what it is, just a story. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most of us believe our stories are facts. We think, no, that person really was disrespectful. But notice what you're doing. You're taking your interpretation and declaring it to be objective reality. You're confusing your mental narrative with what actually happened. Alan Watts spent years pointing this up the territory. Your thoughts about reality are not reality itself, and most human suffering comes from this confusion, from believing that our interpretations are facts rather than just interpretations. So the first step to never being bothered by anyone is to see this mechanism clearly, to catch yourself in the act of story making, to notice the gap between what actually happened and what you're telling yourself about what happened. Because once you see that gap, something shifts. The anger loses its automatic quality. It's no longer this inevitable response that just happens to you. It becomes optional, a choice, and most importantly, it becomes transparent. You start to see that you're not angry at the person. You're angry at your story about the person. And stories, unlike people, can be questioned. They can be released. They can be seen through. This doesn't mean the anger immediately disappears, because there's something quite fascinating happening beneath the surface of anger. Something most people never see. Your ego actually wants to be disturbed. It needs conflict to maintain itself. This sounds counterintuitive. Why would anyone want to be angry or bothered? But watch carefully. The ego, that sense of being a separate self, stays alive through distinction. Through the constant reinforcement that I am me and you are you and we are different. And sometimes we are opposed. When curious happens. The boundaries of yourself become very clear. I am the one who is right. They are the one who is wrong. I am the victim. They are the aggressor. The disturbance actually strengthens your sense of being a separate individual. Alan Watts understood this perfectly. He saw that the ego is like a muscle that needs resistance to stay strong, and anger provides that resistance. Every time you get bothered by someone, you're unconsciously reinforcing the story of yourself as a distinct entity that needs to defend itself, protect itself, assert itself. This is why some people seem almost addicted to being offended. They're constantly finding reasons to be disturbed, to be upset, to be bothered. It's not that they enjoy the feeling of anger itself. It's that the anger gives them a very strong sense of self. It makes them feel real, solid, justified. Think about how live anger can make you feel. There's energy in it. Certainty, righteousness. When you're angry, you know exactly who you are and who the other person is. There's no ambiguity, no confusion, just clear battle lines. But here's the problem. This way of maintaining your sense of self is exhausting. It requires constant vigilance. You have to keep finding threats, keep finding offenses, keep finding reasons to be disturbed. Because if you stop, if you let go, the ego fears it will dissolve. And in a way, it's right. When you stop being bothered by others, when you stop reacting to every perceived slight or offense, something in you does dissolve. Not your actual being, but the rigid armored sense of self that you've been carrying around. The one that needs to be defended at all costs. Alan Watts would say that this dissolution is actually what you've been seeking all along. Because beneath the egos need to be separate. There's a deeper current, a longing to rest, to stop fighting, to recognize that the boundaries you've been nice and the boundaries you've been defending so fiercely are actually part of you, part of worry. You see, when you're not bothered by someone, what happens? The sense of separation softens. You might even feel a moment of compassion, humor, or simple neutrality. And in that moment, you're not as solid, not as defended. There's more space, more flow. This is what the ego fears. Not danger, but spaciousness. Not attack, but the loss of distinction. Because if you're not angry at anyone, if you're not bothered by anyone, then who are you? What defines you? The answer Watts would give is this. You are what you've always. Not the defended ego, but the vast awareness in which all experiences arise. Not the character in the story, but the space in which all stories play out. Not the separate self, but life itself expressing as this particular. But to discover this, you have to stop feeding the ego its favorite food: conflict, opposition, disturbance. You have to starve it of the very thing it uses to stay alive. And that means catching yourself in the act of wanting to be bothered. Notice I said wanting to be bothered. Not being bothered against your will, but unconsciously seeking reasons to be disturbed. This is subtle. Most of the time, you're not aware you're doing it. But if you watch carefully, you'll see it. Someone says something ambiguous. Your mind immediately interprets it in the most offensive way possible. Why? Because some part of you wants the drama, wants the clarity that conflict provides, wants the sense of self that anger reinforces. Or you're scrolling through social media and you find yourself drawn to things that irritate you, posts you disagree with, opinions that offend you, and you read them even though you know they'll disturb you. Why? Because the disturbance feels like being alive. But here's the thing. Once you see this mechanism, once you recognize that you're complicit in your own disturbance, the whole game changes. You can't quite do it the same way anymore. There's too much awareness, too much light shining on the process, and gradually you start to lose interest in being bothered. Not because you've forced yourself to be peaceful, but because you've seen through the need. The ego's hunger for conflict loses its grip. And what emerges is something much more natural, a kind of undefended presence that doesn't need anger to know it. Now we arrive at perhaps the most radical insight Alan Watts offered. The one that, if truly understood, makes anger nearly impossible. The person who bothers you is not separate from you. They are you. Or more precisely, they are the universe expressing itself through a different form. This isn't just poetic language. It's a description of how reality actually works. You and the person who just cut you off in traffic are both temporary expressions of the same underlying existence. Like waves on the ocean, you appear to be separate, but you're both made of the same water. You both arise from the same source. Alan Watts said it this way. You are the universe experiencing itself through human form. But if that's true for you, it's equally true for everyone else. The person you're angry at is also the universe experiencing itself. The person who offended you is also the universe. The person who betrayed you, disappointed you, frustrated you, all the universe. All you, all the same one being playing different roles. Now watch what happens when you really get this, not just intellectually, but in your bones. When someone does something that would normally bother you, there's a recognition. Oh, that's me. That's what I look like when I'm confused. That's what I do when I'm afraid. That's how I behave when I'm unconscious. You don't get angry at the recording. You might feel embarrassment or compassion, but not anger. Because you recognize it's you. You recognize there's no one separate to be angry at. This is what happens when the illusion of separation dissolves. The other person is no longer other. They're a mirror. They're showing you some aspect of the one consciousness that you both are. And you can't be angry at a mirror for showing you what's there. This doesn't mean you approve of harmful behavior. It doesn't mean you become passive or allow yourself to be mistreated. But the quality of your response changes completely. Instead of reactive anger, there's clear seeing. Instead of personal offense, there's impersonal awareness. Think about how you respond when a child does something foolish. If you're centered, you don't take it personally. You don't make it about you. You see that the child is simply being a child, acting from limited understanding. There might be correction, guidance, even firm boundaries, but not the burning resentment and personal attack. This is how the awakened person relates to everyone. Not because they're seeing others as inferior like children, but because they're seeing everyone as expressions of the same consciousness playing out different levels of awareness. The person who bothers you is you at a different frequency. You in a different costume. You're playing a different role in the cosmic drama. Alan Watts was fond of pointing out that life is like a game of hide and seek that God plays with himself. The divine hides in every form, pretends to be separate, and then gradually wakes up to its true nature. So when someone bothers you, what's really happening? God is bothering God. The universe is poking itself. The one is pretending to be offended by itself. And when you see this clearly, it's actually quite funny. The whole drama of interpersonal conflict becomes a cosmic comedy, not in a way that diminishes real pain or harm, but in a way that reveals the deeper truth. Nobody is doing anything to anybody. There's only the one doing everything to itself. This recognition is the ultimate freedom from being bothered. Because how can you be bothered by yourself? How can the ocean be disturbed by its own waves? How can consciousness be offended by its own content? You can't. Once this lands not just as an idea but as a living recognition, the possibility of being truly bothered by another person simply evaporates. What remains is vast, spacious awareness, within which all the drama of human interaction plays out like a movie. Compelling perhaps, but not personal. Never personal. Personal. There's no person to take it personal. There's only the one playing all the parts, bothering itself and forgiving itself in an eternal dance. So how do you actually live this? How do you move from understanding these ideas to embodying them in real life when someone is genuinely irritating you? Alan Watts would say you don't try to not be angry. That's just more ego activity. Trying to be spiritual, trying to be enlightened, trying to be the person who never gets bothered. Instead, you simply watch. You notice. When anger arises, you don't suppress it or judge it. You don't say, I shouldn't be angry. You simply observe it with curiosity. Oh, there's anger. There's the story in my mind. There's the contraction in my chest. There's the thought that this person is wrong. This noticing creates space. Not the space of trying to fix the anger, but the space of awareness itself. And in that space, you begin to see that the anger is not you. It's something happening in you. Like weather passing through the sky. You are the sky, not the weather. The more you practice this simple noticing, the less identified you become with your reactions. Anger still might arise. Irritation still might appear. But there's no longer someone taking ownership of it. No longer someone making it mean something about who you are or who the other person is. This is what Watts meant by letting go. Not forcefully releasing the anger, but seeing it so clearly that it releases itself, like holding sand in your fist. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers, but open your hand and the sand simply falls away. The practice is to keep opening your hand, to keep creating space, to keep choosing awareness over story, presence over reaction. Not as a discipline that you force yourself to maintain, but as a natural response to seeing clearly. And here's what happens over time. The situations that used to bother you intensely start to have less charge. The people who could ruin your entire day with one comment begin to lose that power. Not because you've built stronger walls or better defenses, but because you've stopped believing in the fundamental separation that makes anger necessary. You realize that being bothered is optional. It's a habit, not a requirement. It's something you've been doing unconsciously. And now that consciousness is present, the pattern starts to dissolve on its own. Like darkness disappearing when you turn on a light. You didn't fight the darkness. You just introduced light, and the darkness had nowhere to stay. This is the practice. Not achieving some permanent state of never being angry, not becoming an emotionless Buddha who floats above life, but simply seeing clearly moment by moment and allowing that clarity to do its work, allowing the light of awareness to dissolve the habitual patterns of disturbance, gently, gently, naturally, without force. So we return to where we began, how to never get angry or bothered by anyone. And the answer, as Alan Watts would offer it, is not a technique or a method. It's a shift in seeing, a recognition of what's actually true. You are not a separate self that needs to defend itself against a world of other separate selves. You are the vast awareness in which all experience arises. You are the space in which anger appears and disappears. You are the consciousness that witnesses all this. The person who bothers you is not your enemy. They are your teacher. They are showing you where you still believe in separation, where you still think there's a you that can be threatened by a them, where you still take the cosmic. And as you see this more and more clearly, something miraculous happens. The anger doesn't need to be eliminated. It simply loses interest in staying. Like a guest who realizes they're at the wrong party, it quietly shows itself out. What remains is not cold indifference. It's warm, spacious presence. It's the ability to respond to life with clarity instead of reactivity, to set boundaries without resentment, to disagree without disturbance, to see harmful behavior clearly without making it personal. This is freedom. Not freedom from ever feeling anger, but freedom from being enslaved by it. Not freedom from people who irritate you, but freedom from needing them to be different for you to be at peace. The glory of this is that you discover peace was never conditional. It was never dependent on others behaving correctly or the world arranging itself to your preferences. Peace is what you are beneath all the stories of disturbance. It's been there all along, waiting patiently for you to stop being bothered long enough to notice. And in that noticing, the question itself dissolves. How to never get angry. You realize there was never anyone there to be angry in the first place. Just life, expressing itself infinitely, bothering itself and liberating itself in one eternal dance. Just this, just this, just this.